Yo, what's going on, everybody? So today I'm actually going to be doing a video about FD Signifier, a popular leftist YouTuber, um, does a lot of sociology, cultural analysis videos, particularly with a black culture emphasis. In other words, analysis of the quote unquote the culture. Um, he does a lot of, very interesting videos, I think, on a lot of subjects that a lot of traditionally, stereotypically speaking, a lot of African Americans weren't publicly engaging in. He'll talk about anime, he'll talk about edgelord culture, he'll talk about nerd culture, he'll talk about a lot of the spheres and spaces of the internet that a lot of black people actually engage in, but don't necessarily talk about, right? He'll talk about the manosphere. He'll talk about edgelords. He'll talk about a lot of different things. And his videos, I used to subscribe to him. I don't subscribe to him currently, not because I'm hating on him or disliking him or anything like that. I have probably some disagreements with his philosophy, worldview, what have you. We'll get into that later. None of this is scripted, by the way. I'm actually working and actually making this at the same time, so I'm actually going to be pausing and everything like that. And I'm just free flowing, right? Because similarly to a lot of other YouTube content creators, is they make kind of long form media, right? So it's kind of hard to pinpoint exact timestamps of the things you hear and the things I know about him from what I've seen in his videos. And it's a catch 22 because if you engage with their videos, and like I said, I don't have a problem engaging with his videos. I hope he does very well for himself and everything. But when you're engaging their videos, the algorithm naturally in YouTube rewards these people, even if you don't necessarily 100% agree with their give and take in a given video on a given day. So you're kind of enticed to engage with these people. You're rewarding them even though you may not agree with them. And they see in people, and this is across all of YouTube, if you're getting a lot of engagement, I think that people necessarily think that's automatically a good thing. Like people are just watching your videos because they necessarily they like your stuff or something or whatnot, or like you're naturally popular or something. And that's the thing about data. Data can be interpreted many different ways. But that aside, right? I don't hate FD Signifier, and about myself is I'm actually from Metro Atlanta, right? I grew up as a military kid, but I ended up settling down in the Metro Atlanta area around 2000, the year 2000, and my family, my dad's family they're all basically from Georgia, and not Atlanta, but like the deep south of Georgia, country, backwoods, country towns, like that's where I would always visit my relatives and eat catfish and grits and Southern church and corporal punishment and discipline and and segregation, seeing all that type of stuff, right? I'm from Georgia. I consider Georgia a home. I bounce back and forth between different places, but when it comes to a place I know I can get in a car and know where to go, I know Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? I did not grow up in the city of Atlanta because Atlanta is a metropolitan area. Atlanta is a behemoth of a sprawled place. It's kind of like Dallas Fort Worth. It's kind of like everything kind of bleeds into Dallas and Fort Worth, but the cities themselves of Dallas and Fort Worth are almost kind of more minuscule than the surrounding areas. That's kind of like how Atlanta is. Atlanta's changed a lot. It's a lot more development, corporations, gentrification, corporate real estate, all that type of stuff has really changed the city of Atlanta. In other words, inside of the perimeter, which is a term I have a problem with because it naturally creates this kind of bourgeoisie kind of separation between the people who live within the perimeter, which is basically inside of 285, and the people who live outside of the perimeter, which is outside of 285, Interstate 285. But Atlanta's changed a lot, and like being from the Metro Atlanta area, And having moved there as a young youth and having the existential crisis of having to adopt that culture and kind of feeling out of place, I have a hate love relationship with it because I kind of rep Atlanta in many ways. It's like if people mess with Atlanta, I'm like, whoa, 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 like you need to slow down, bro. Like, like you kind of rep your city. Like it's a place that people hate, but when you live there, it's really a good place to be, and you realize that the haters of it are just hating because they just don't kind of got it like Atlanta. Like Atlanta is kind of a good place to raise a family. It's a place where people kind of get along. It's not this racially segregated place that I've actually witnessed in more northern cities. You go to some northern cities, they're way more ethnic enclaves and racism and police brutality than what I've seen in the southern United States. But there's the stereotype that the South is more racist or whatnot, right? Atlanta's a very unique place. A lot of people think it's Chocolate City and all this, the new Black Harlem Renaissance or whatnot, and that's very true in many cases. But it's really kind of a white black city, really at the end of the day. You did have issues like white flight, but those people are going to leave anyway, and they become the little suburban Republicans. You have a lot of white people who actually didn't flee, and they're still living in East Atlanta. They're still living in the nicer neighborhoods, most of them, or whatnot, but they're still Atlanta at the end of the day, right? Atlanta is a very unique city because it's one of the true first cities where black political power consolidated and the white people learned to live with it. And they didn't necessarily flee. They learned to kind of do business with it. And everybody kind of benefited in this kind of capitalist, behemoth, corporate blah that became the metro Atlanta area. And there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of problems. I'm not necessarily here to make apologetics for capitalism and these things, right? But in many ways, you can if you're a part of just the normal middle class or whatever, it's not a bad place to live. You know what I'm saying? I don't think there's necessarily negatives in what capitalism has actually given us as a society. I have a problem with systemic capitalism in the fact that capitalism is eating away at every single thing of American culture and life, monetizing our time, our insecurities, everything, sexuality, what have you. But Atlanta is a dope place, right? And I know that a lot of times when I hear FD speak, he's speaking with this kind of certainty of almost kind of like exclusiveness, exclusivity, or whatnot, in which it's kind of like I'm from Atlanta, I know, or whatever, and I'm kind of inserting my background in there and saying, no, I know, you know what I'm saying? I know the entire metro area. I know Mechanicsville. I know the West End, Bankhead. I used to go to church and kind of near Fort McPherson, Ben Hill, Greenbrier Mall area, all that. I know Riverdale, Jonesboro, the airport areas, and all that type of things. I know Decatur. I mean, what have you? I mean, Moreland Ave, and everything. East Atlanta Village, Little Five Points, Virginia Avenue, uh, Bankhead, Buckhead, Brookhaven, what you want, Piedmont Park. I mean, it kind of Virginia Highlands, Ponce Highlands, all these type of areas. Um, Atlanta's a dope place, man. I mean, it all bleeds together. You know what I'm saying? You got Gwinnett County, Cobb County, all the northern super suburbs and everything that kind of feed into it. That traditionally had all the big shopping malls and the big high schools, and they're the powerhouses. You have 4,000 kids in a school, and they just dominate everybody in sports or whatnot, right? And all the corporations are up there, Home Depot and Georgia Pacific and all that. And then I grew up on the south side suburbs and everything like that. So I know Fairburn, College Park, East Point, Tyrone, Peachtree City, Fayetteville, Lovejoy, Palmetto, Douglasville, even. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know these areas. Atlanta is a big part of me. I know I-20, I-85, 75, 285, all the little backways, Ralph Abernathy, all these type of things, right? I know where I was literally walking around Morehouse University not that long ago or whatnot, and then there's Spelman, and then it's Atlanta's a wild place. There's a lot of issues there. it kind of feels like Atlanta is a city where it's so much going on, so much capitalism, so much activity that you can be around millions of people and feel absolutely alone. Is that type of place. And everybody knows you're just trapped in traffic. MARTA, they've been fighting, trying to expand MARTA since segregation, desegregation. I mean, it's just one of those things, right? Like Atlanta means a lot to me. Like my first job as a teenager when I was 14 was at a Zaxby's, frying chicken strips and French fries and Texas toast or whatnot. When the first Zaxby's were coming from Statesboro, Georgia, where Georgia Southern's at. I am a Georgian, whether I want to admit it or not. And so I just want to insert my background, to know that I got credentials to understand what a lot of FD Signifier is talking about, and to kind of disarm this fact of, I said, like, exclusivity, that, just because we're from the Metro Atlanta area, somehow we know something more about everything black. Because I think one of the reasons why I'm making this video is because I think JD or FD and myself, we have probably a slight different of opinion between what actually is blackness to a certain extent. I think that FD signifier is operating in the mentality that blackness is a unique, separate thing with its own historicity, its own culture, its own all this type of stuff, right? And I largely agree with that. But I also think that culture is relative and culture is subjective and culture changes over time or whatnot. I think one of the things I like saying about culture in general, human cultures, is that culture, the root word of culture is cult. You know what I'm saying? These are mental constructs that we kind of adopt and live by. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, for FD signifier, for a person, particularly who calls himself a leftist, where let's just say that he promotes, let's just say, the fluidity of gender or the subjectivity of gender, I don't necessarily know if he 100% agrees or accepts the subjectivity of racial culture or whatnot. And I would say that that's kind of an inconsistency. I'm not saying you need to just, everything is relative, subjective, man, or whatnot, but it's just kind of interesting. It's like, this is what I notice about just the left in general, in both white and black culture, right? And to make a comparison, like I support, I believe that there is a difference between sex and gender, for example, right? And that took me a while as I grew in my development to understand that, right? But the left will be like, oh yeah, gender is relative and everything like that. But the moment they see like a black person like listening to rock music, it like blows their heads up or something. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just very fascinating. It's like, some things are objectively true, but then other things are subjective. And I just think that there's kind of an inconsistency between those positions. And what is my philosophy on what it means to be black? What is a black person? Um, a black person, to me, an African American, the traditional African American. I hate to say it, but let's be real. A foundational black American. In other words, a black person who can trace their lineage to the foundation and the establishment of what we consider to be the United States of America up until its founding, and I would probably say up until the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act or something. You trace your lineage between those time frames. So like 1619 basically to 1965, right? What does it mean to be an African American? An African American is a person typically of West African origins who was forcibly assimilated into Western culture, right? And because of the racism and systemic abuse that black people suffered as being cattle, basically, in order to prop up a colonial, racial, psychosexual caste system, essentially, black people had to parallel evolve our understanding of Western culture alongside the predominant white superstructure, is what I would probably say, right? So this is why it seems like white people and black people are night and day, unfortunately, because it was intended, unfortunately, to be that way in its inception, in its creation. They didn't want black people talking the King's English. They didn't want black people seeming like them, because A, they couldn't control us if that would be the case, and B, there would be no differentiation in order to create the agitprop and the separation and class struggle and division that a colonialist, imperialist, feudalist system needs to control essentially the peasants, both white, black, Native American, what have you. So black people were taken from West Africa, kingdoms and nation states and all these type of things, um, and we were taken over here, forcefully absorbed into Western civilization. So we are a Western peoples. African Americans are a Western peoples. Our language is Western. Our religion is typically Western, Westernized. Our philosophy, how we think, how we argue, in a way, can all be traced back to ancient Greece because that civilization fell upon us or whatnot. And it doesn't matter if you're the most down looking, woke, whatever, I don't date white women, whatever black person, I'm only going to HBCUs. I only support black this or that. Versus, let's just say a black person, the opposite end of that argument or that spectrum. We're all kind of in the house, is what I say, because the house is Western civilization, which is why it's kind of meaningless to call someone a house slave versus a field slave, because the house, in my philosophy, how I argue it, is Western civilization. And the only way to truly deprogram from Western civilization is to truly deprogram from it. You can't have one foot in the door and one foot on the outside and kind of live in this kind of, I hate to say it, kind of, in other words, living on the fence and then just using that as your identity, as like the bare basis of your extrapolation of what it means to be a black person. To me, is it's kind of like that since the house is Western civilization, if you're really against it, you have to totally unprocess from it. And I hate to say it, go back to a true indigenous, organic African way of being before even anything Western even came into our thought consciousness and everything. But a lot of the people that you consider to be the most down black people aren't doing that. They're still in the house, but they're the first ones to call someone a house inward or something when you don't necessarily conform or comply to the subjective aesthetics of what it means to be a black person at any given moment in time and space, which is always varying and always fluctuating and always evolving and always morphing, right? Like, for example, for FD Signifier, right? He's the type of guy who will talk about anime, right? I remember if you were a black person who ever talked about anime, it would be like, well, who are you? You're not even black, right? But the needle has moved. Black people are allowed to express themselves a lot more than what we were allowed to even just a couple decades ago, a couple years ago. But what I notice in some black current content YouTubers is that they don't actually admit that that's the case. They don't admit that we, even in our own community, were holding each other down in our own self-expression. But now that it's acceptable to express yourself in a given way, they don't want to admit that that is how it was or whatnot. Because in one thing I notice about black content creators when it comes to the pro black stuff is you're almost not even allowed to critique black anything. It's almost like if anybody hears a sense of criticism, they almost flee and they think that you're somehow being anti-black or something like that. And that's another notion that I just noticed about a lot of, like, I would say, I hate to say it, the dreadhead black sociologists, scholars of YouTube. And so it's just interesting, right? But what does it mean to be a black person in America? To me, I don't. To me, the ultimate goal of a black person living in the civilization is freedom. It is freedom from definition. It is freedom to do who you want, to pursue who to do whatever you want, basically, or whatnot. Because we know what the exact opposite means when we don't have freedom. It means to be locked into something through generational chattel slavery or whatnot. And put it this way, it's okay that we have internalized our trauma and used it to empower ourselves, right? This is why black people say the N word. You can have debates about it or whatnot. I don't personally say it. I think it's an empty, useless calorie word. I don't think there's anything endearing about it. But at the same time, if I hear a black person say it, I'm not angry. And if a person who's not white says it, I'm gonna have an issue with it. But I don't personally say it because I think it's just an empty calorie word that is indicative of our situation. In other words, it's like, in other words, black culture, and like I said, I'm just flowing here. Black culture, I hate to say it, is kind of like being a sexual assault victim, in which, and this is a stereotype, but when people say how the sexual assault victim becomes hypersexualized, in other words, you would kind of think of black culture similarly as the same of people who've been so oppressed, so belittled, some of the worst treatment, both physically, sexually, mentally, what have you, things that America does not want to talk about because they know it would be the most triple X NC-17 Hellraiser on Earth rendition treatment of a human that has probably happened in the modern, quote unquote, modern world from the Enlightenment period to today, 1600s till today, happened to black people. They don't want to talk about that. Any Hollywood movie you've seen about slavery has always watered down the actual hard truths of what it means to be a black person in America and the treatment of our ancestors. And my ancestors were slaves from Georgia because, ironically, interestingly, unlike FD's people, we didn't go up north. We didn't flee up north during the Great Migrations or out west during the second Great Migrations. We stayed our black asses down south. And the same plantations, literally, we would go to church on the remnants of those plantations. I'm talking about you know the stereotype anytime you see like a southern movie and they always got the yeah like the weird violin twang going on to kind of insinuate this weird antebellum Victorian almost gothic Ed, Edgar Allan Poe-esque, romantic horror. That's the type of area that my people are from. No joke, no lie, right? But because I sound a certain way, does that mean necessarily that like I'm less black or something? And that's not the impetus of me making this video. But what I'm trying to get at is that people have a fetish, both black and people outside of black culture, to impurify blackness, to create an objective truth of aesthetics, what I would consider a slavery of aesthetics, right? And even though you can gain value from that and power from that as objects, and we're all objects, right? Now we're getting into some weird continental philosophy of semiotics and ontology and things of that nature, right? Um, we are all objects with values in relation to each other. So, in a certain way, black people can get value underneath this concept of being kind of having a culture that's exclusive that nobody else can have. And in other words, culture is a currency to a certain extent. But at the same time, my only issue is that very well, even though it's awesome that we have, let's just say, of this black culture or whatnot that people stereotypically imagine in their head or whatever, and there's a currency there, is that it is not the all-encompassing objective truth. And to be a leftist, a person who tries to subvert notions of subjective truths because those objective truths can be innately oppressive, is very interesting. That is totally acceptable for, let's just say, certain people within the black community to project this sense of objective blackness when I don't think it personally exists. I think that there is a truth of what it means to be black, but I think that everybody has their subjective experiences that are kind of merging and coalescing to create the definition of what it means to be black. However, we bury certain voices, we bury certain aesthetics, we bury certain things because we as black people, unfortunately, are trying to always compete to make it seem like we are the truth, the harbingers of truth or whatever of what it means to be a black person. And that's what I kind of feel like FD does sometimes. In other words, I am I am the arbiter of truth of what it means to be black or whatnot. And I'm not saying that he's claimed to do that because he'll put disclaimers in. I don't claim to have the truths to everything or the answers to anything or whatever, right? That he's assuring himself, but at the end of the day, it's like he still kind of plays with it without sometimes understanding that's what he's doing, in my personal opinion. Um, or maybe it just naturally expresses from himself because of my own bias. But, anyways, to be black in America, to me, like I said, is just there are certain principles, right? We descend from slaves. We descend from this. parallel culture, that this parallel universe culture that is almost a divergent culture. We had to diverge from the white superstructure culture because we weren't allowed to engage with the overall benefits of the white society and everything like that. So, but it almost becomes comically yin yang at a certain point. What, they wear their pants up, we wear our pants down. They talk quote unquote proper, we're supposed to talk not proper, or whatever, or whatever that means, right? They like their food bland, we like our food spicy. Don't you just notice how everything just seems to be opposite? Because black people need to be opposite in order for this white supremacist system to keep sustaining itself. So interestingly, by, I would argue, doubling down in this kind of hardcore pan-Africanist type of thing, you're actually benefiting the white supremacist system. Because in a way, as controversial as it sounds, black culture is essentially just the blackened version of white supremacy. That's just, but we've just self-absorbed it and kind of inverted the negative aspects into a sense of cultural endearment for ourselves. But put it this way, the white supremacist is totally happy that black people are over there and angry at them and wanting to do their own thing and totally living within their own philosophy. Because that was always the intention anyway. It was always the intention. Basically, we were separate by force underneath slavery, but after desegregation, what's the best way to keep a people separate? Just promote their own self-determination and say, get away from me, and everything like that. And I feel that, and I know this, having grown up around a lot of white people, is that a lot of white people sometimes they'll reference Malcolm X, they'll reference these people to justify their own white supremacy. They'll try to make false equivalencies between the Black Panthers trying to feed, black people in Oakland or whatnot. They'll try to create false equivalencies between that and white supremacist terror groups of the early 20th century. They want differentiation, and they want difference. So I think to myself, as a person who considers myself a leftist and a black person, but not necessarily this concept of the stereotypical objective black person that you see, I kind of feel like an anarchist. In other words, you're not going to define me. You're not going to quantify me. You can do it, you can say whatever you want to. Nobody can take what I am away from me. Because at the end of the day, no matter how you talk, dress, what you listen to, who you date, who you marry, people are still going to see that black skin. So what does it really mean to be, let's just say, black in a woke enlightenment sense? It's not that complicated. It doesn't mean having dreads and talking about the blight of black women all day. It basically means being aware that you are black and that people will have negative views of that, and you have to be aware of that. It's just that simple. And you can be a black person living in bourgeoisie suburbia, which FD Signifier seems to have a problem with or something, though benefiting from the capitalist algorithm of YouTube or whatever in his indictments of the black bourgeoisie or whatever. So you could be a black person living in that environment, or you can be a black person living in the stereotypical environment of poverty and victimhood and trauma and everything like that, right? And we are all influenced by our upbringings, right? So, for example, I know that FD Signifier is from a single parent household, I believe from Chicago, and he eventually migrated probably down south to attend the HBCUs to get more connection with the culture and all that type of stuff. Totally fine, totally understandable. Um, understandable, right? But it's just interesting that I had a lot of black people, unfortunately, because they come from these environments, they almost think, and I've literally physically seen this. If you don't have the same background that they have, but that they want it, they'll almost try to say that they're blacker than that person because they measure their blackness in the suffering, in the victimization, in that. So if you don't have that, if you had a two-parent household, if you lived in a suburban house and you went on vacations and there was happiness or something like that, even though they deeply want that and they're aspiring for it and they're working towards it for their own selves, just like FD Signifier is doing as he's gaining his algorithm money for his family or whatnot, they still need to retain this keeping it real politic in which their existence of blackness is somehow superior than yours because they're in a weird way or in a way closer to the source of blackness. And ironically, what they don't understand is that those people who are quote unquote closer to the streets or whatever are the pornified versions that the white liberal and the white conservative, and not even the white conservative, just the world in general with their fascination of black people want to exist because it is different or whatnot. It's like it's just it's very interesting. It's like yeah, yeah, yeah. So so much going on, right? So like I said, I have a very unique philosophy, right? It's very existential inspired, is in almost right. And like I said, to me is there is no distinction between the house and the field because the house is Western civilization, and the only way to truly unprocess from Western civilization is to unprocess from it. And if you're not willing to do that, you need to kind of just, I hate to say it, accept and embrace where you are and make the most of it and contribute to it. So the civilization is also yours. Because, you know what I'm saying? In other words, own the civilization. You are a civilization. Be a philosopher. Be these things, right? You are not different. Fight for yourself within it or whatnot. Instead of living in this to be or not to be constant, perpetual existential crisis, Hamlet staring down at the skull position. So it's just very interesting to me. It's like I mean, black culture to me just doesn't even exist. But it does exist. But black culture is so different in many ways. For example, a lot of people want to think that black culture is just this hip hop post Tupac sort of culture. It's not. What happened to gospel? What happened to soul music? What happened to our music? We killed off our own music in many ways because we were chasing an aesthetic of a value that was ironically constructed by the cultural appropriation of corporate America of black culture, and we chased that. I saw it in my own family. I saw people chase what it meant to be the Tupacs or the Jay-Z's or whatever, and we totally forgot our own roots. That wasn't white people's fault. That was on us. Not thinking all the problems that came with it, right? Think about this. You literally had black kids, black families, and not just the one outs and everything, like a lot of black people who aren't from these environments think. You have suburbias where there's a lot of black people in certain parts of this country, whether it's in the Midwest or the South or the Mid Atlantic or whatever. Their kids were put into situations where they think they have to go act like people on the street, closer to the source of authentic blackness as we understand it, in order to fit in with their people, into order to be even to fit in with the non-black people around them. Because, like I said, the non-black people around them have this fetishization of what it means to be street raw blackness, right? They're constantly looking for the blackest object in the room to appraise themselves against, to get to hear them speak or whatever like that, right? And they think that it's because and they're doing this because they think that they're trying to learn something, but I think subconsciously it's about, in a weird way for some of them without realizing it, it's about justifying the differentiation that exists and which they hope still persists. So I remember seeing, a lot of black youths in suburbia from very good homes almost ruin their lives just because they were out here chasing something that they thought was blackness or whatnot because they were alone. A lot of the non-black people kind of looked at them maybe as an oddity. Sure, they were friends with them or something like that though too, but there's always going to be that little separation, right? But then black people who haven't made it up the economic ladder to where you at are pulling you down too. So what do? And this creates a lot of confusion for people, right? And FD Signifier's idea is just to be in more black spaces then or whatnot. But what I'm saying is that those black spaces always aren't the healthiest things to begin with, and sometimes they're, if not more closed-minded than what black people might be experiencing in non-black environments. In many ways, in weird ways, it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. You may be around other black people, but you may not be able to express yourself and be who you want to be. Versus if you're around many non-black people, you're always going to be seen as that black person, even though you might be able to express yourself in ways that your own people may not think is even possible to begin with. So it's just very interesting, right? Um, and that's the thing too, is like when I say, we are all in the house. I don't care if you are the blackest looking whatever with the Muslim beard from Philadelphia talking on some Nation of Islam, hate whitey type stuff or whatever, or you're the HBCU black bourgeoisie, black excellence person living in Houston or Atlanta or Charlotte or Prince William County, Virginia, or St. Louis or wherever. I don't care. It's the thing is we are all in the house. So what does it mean to be outside of it? I wrote about this personally in my own blog. Is we would have to Black people would have to develop a totally alien philosophy. We would have to basically go back to Africa, totally deprocess from our Western conditioning. If we truly think that Western conditioning is 100% bad and none of it has been beneficial, or none of it is just the natural evolution of, just, I hate to say it, kind of being conquered, just like other groups have been conquered throughout time, even like white people conquering other white people. And we would have to basically totally deprocess from Western civilization and create an almost, I call it Southern philosophy. We would have to create a total Pan Africanist philosophy with its own ethics, metaphysics, um, ontology, epistemology, or whatever, heuristics, all these different philosophical terms, logic. We would have to create all that separate from what we are currently in. And it already kind of exists in Africa. It probably just hasn't been given an actual pantheon. It hasn't been, in other words, it hasn't been organized. In other words, right? Maybe with technology, maybe with artificial intelligence, we could do it. And we could add some IFA or whatever it is. We could add all the various, you know, ethnic storytelling and folklore from all the Bantu A, Bantu B, um, Nilotic peoples, all the San people, all the various African peoples, right? We would have to almost compress almost 3,000 years of various anthropological research, logic games, game theory into a computer and just see what it spits out in order to like figure out what it would mean to have like a Southern philosophy that's totally alien and different from Western philosophy. Because at the end of the day, does Black philosophy really exist? And I've even written about this as well. Yes and no. What is Black philosophy? We're really saying Black Western philosophy. We're really saying Black people existentially analyzing our existences, living in Western civilization, using Western methodologies and frameworks to extrapolate that existence in our conditions, right? To understand ourselves, right? So it's ultimately Western. You can say that Richard Wright is kind of just like no different than Albert Camus or something, right? Or James Baldwin is no different than Sartre or whatnot. It's still Westernized at the end of the day. It's just us understanding ourselves as Black people using those Western frameworks. So what I'm saying is, if you really want to be Black, you would have to totally negate any Western or Eastern framework and develop your own simultaneous parallel framework to truly explore what it means to be Black. But I'm getting way too crazy, right? In how I probably sound and everything, which is, I don't think I sound crazy. I think I'm just honest to the fact that a person like FD Signifier and the aesthetic in which he is looked at on and how he articulates things isn't the all end of Black philosophy. I think it's just a point in time and space, and that works right now. And I think that's just kind of how it is. I mean, I think that's just who it is. In other words, I don't see FD Signifier as being an objective truth or anything at all. Um, Even though he's not claiming to be so, but then again, he kind of does, because he has a firm objective view to a certain extent of what it means to be a Black person. And he talks with kind of authority about that, whether he realizes it or not. And it's almost kind of like, and maybe that's just his own personal bias, subconscious bias or whatnot. In other words, he cannot help but to see blackness through a certain lens, right? Like I hate to say it, he probably still lives in a worldview in which there's Wills and there's Carltons. And I would say that those two things are actually grossly oversimplified like notions of what it means to be a black person. And he actually did an analysis video on I think the latest newest Fresh Prince of Bel Air rendition, right? And even in his analysis, there's almost an air of kind of disdain for the Carlton character still. In other words, it's kind of and the writers even wrote Carlton as this kind of disdain character, rather than actual the truth of the matter is that there's Carltons who are actually probably more woke and enlightened sometimes than the people like Will. Just because Will is from that necessarily victimized environment, what we're really saying is to be black means you have to come from an effed up environment or background. What are we really saying about ourselves then? In many ways, the Carlton there's many quote unquote Carltons who grew up with a black mom and a black father, who grew up knowing that they were black and that the world was going to see them as different, and they have to act and move in a different way, and they have to stand up for themselves. But I feel like from his background and other people in this cornbread space, cornbread tube, they literally call it that, cornbread tube. In other words, it is not a part of the quote unquote wonder bread white bread tube of left wing YouTube. It's totally different and everything like that. It's cornbread too, right? Um, the thing I notice about a lot of this cornbread tube thing is that they're almost kind of pushing the same stereotypes that they're, I guess, trying to like fight against or something. Like it seems a little confusing and everything. But then also a slight issue with FD Signifier is that at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that really gripes me is he'll talk about the black bourgeoisie, black excellence, how it didn't save us or something. What do you mean it didn't save us? The black bourgeoisie literally helped build the city of Atlanta in which you're living in and benefiting from. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just kind of goofy to me. It's almost defeatist. It's like, in other words, what he's kind of saying is, I didn't grow up in an environment of like that. I didn't grow up in the getting Christmas gifts or whatever in two black parent household or whatnot. I must be more black, and therefore I'm a part of the struggle because I'm just not rich yet, though I'm being made rich by the YouTube algorithm. But I guess, but because he's probably a communist, and I don't have an issue. I'm not a communist. I'm sympathetic to Marxism. I just don't want to consider myself a communist. The thing is that, and this is kind of what Hassan does too, is they'll justify making money by basically saying I'm not exploiting anyone. In other words, but they'll also kind of argue and get above the accusation by saying that there's no ethical consumption in capitalism to begin with, so whatever, I'm just doing what I have to do. So therefore, these quote unquote opinion people, they're not revolutionary at all. They're not necessarily living in opposition to the system that they critique. They're just opining about its flaws while simultaneously benefiting from it. And I have an issue partially with that when you try to throw, let's just say, the black bourgeoisie, for example, under the bus, because maybe that's what black people needed. Maybe black people needed to feel what it felt like to be a manager and to have success and to have assets and to have generational wealth to pass down to your family and everything like that. So we're supposed to feel ashamed of that now? What, you're trying to just create an existential crisis or something now, unilaterally speaking, while benefiting, like I said, from arguably the same logical underpinnings of the bourgeoisie yourself, making money off the YouTube algorithm? So I guess I'm trying to, what I'm really saying with through all this FD signifier stuff is he's subjective. You know what I'm saying? And if you want to listen to a subjective person, and I guess we all are subjective, whatever, fine. But I would just say, put it this way: always take even what FD signifier says as just a piece of the equation. That's all I'm saying. His opinion matters, but always remember that it's just a part of the pie. Maybe it's a bigger slice, maybe it's a smaller slice. Maybe it's just some crumbs, maybe it's just some frosting. I don't know. But at the end of the day, he is just a part of the equation. And to the people who watch him, don't hate on the guy, support him and everything like that. It's just we need to realize. So what I was saying is, what does it mean to be black? And I would say what it means to be black is having the freedom to choose what it is you want to do and how you want to express yourself. And I think that blackness comes in all different forms, shapes, sizes. You know what I'm saying? But and it's so strange is that I feel like a lot of black people in the black nationalist, Pan Africanist space, which is typically more left wing oriented, they're all about inclusion and all these type of things, right? But it's kind of like I feel like sometimes they use these words and these terms in order to get people to just not really like oppress black people, but deep down inside, there's this need to just have like black segregation, self segregation, or something like that in a world totally separate from everyone else, or something like that. I don't know. It just seems interesting. Uh, and like, trust me, I want black people to succeed, and I want black people to succeed. But at the end of the day, too, it's like I just don't be a slave to aesthetics is what I'm trying to say. Don't be a slave to following the trends and honestly, if I were to see another black person and everything, and my wife, she jokes at this. Anytime I see like another black person, right? And I don't know if you experience this, we always nod at each other. We always have this kind of like natural nod, like what's up, or kind of like nod, like all right now, go on, yeah, like it's like this weird kind of acknowledging our existences and everything like that because in other words, we're almost kind of saying it's okay to be here. You know what I'm saying? Like it's okay, man. Oh, I see you're out here. Oh, so you're hiking too. Oh, so you got a little soft side too. I see or whatever, right? We're always kind of acknowledging and trying to support each other in these ways, right? But all I'm saying is you don't have to look and all act the same to be black. And how are we truly gonna support black people if we can't even support black difference and black nuance and all this type of stuff, right? And we're constantly projecting this keeping it real BS or whatnot. Like if I feel like I would need to keep it real in order to maintain a black audience, then I guess I just wouldn't have one. People can just take what I have to say and just take it for what it is or something. But I'm not gonna just like try to like keep it real just to like not be fully authentic to myself. I'm not saying that's what Signifier is doing. I think he's being authentic to himself. I just think that based off of his environment and background or whatnot, he's not necessarily as worldly as what he probably thinks he is, even if he is the black person who watches a little anime. But so there's that. So actually, I'm gonna kind of just chill for a little bit, right? And I don't know what this video is. I've never watched it before. I'm always gonna respond to it in real time. But I'm probably just gonna pause and just leave it right there and kind of treat this as like my introduction to like my FD signifier stuff, right? So I'll just leave it kind of like that for right now. And just thank you for your time. All right, peace. All right, bye.